scientific research team, otherwise known as the Basement. I'm joined today by Leona Fan Chang, also of the Basement, and over Skype from Europe we have Lyndon LaRouche. So Leona, I think you're going to start us off. So the first thing I want to read is from Felix Mendelssohn. And Mendelssohn was a classical composer in Germany in the early to middle 19th century. He was part of a family which was deeply in the legacy of the American revolutionary circles in Europe, and were fighting for a classical tradition in Germany in the German language. So Mendelssohn was asked by a friend to explain the title of a series of songs that he released, which was Songs Without Words. And so Mendelssohn says, "People often complain that music is ambiguous, that their ideas on the subject always seem so vague, whereas everyone understands words. With me, it is exactly the reverse, not merely with regard to entire sentences, but also as to individual words. These too seem to me so ambiguous, so vague, so unintelligible when compared with genuine music, which fills the soul with 1,000 things better than words. What the music I love expresses to me is not thought too indefinite to be put into words, but on the contrary, too definite. If you ask me what my idea is, I say just the song as it stands. And if I have in my mind a definite term or terms with regard to one or more of these songs, I will disclose them to no one, because the words of one person assume a totally different meaning in the mind of another person, because the music of the song alone can awaken the same ideas and the same feelings in one mind as in another. A feeling which is not, however, expressed by the same words. Words have many meanings, and yet music we could both understand correctly." Now, this idea of a scientific precision of the communication of an unseen concept, which Mendelssohn so beautifully expresses, this was carried on in the tradition of science that we see in Max Planck. And I wanted to reference Planck in particular because not only is he, although older, but contemporary with Kraft-Erika. And it is absolutely the tradition that Kraft-Erika and others come out of. But he was also a classical musician. And when he was a young man, he had to make a choice between pursuing a career as a concert pianist and a physicist. And Planck, this is an interview he gives in 1931. Planck says, "There is certainly a kinship between science and art. But at the same time, the differences are very marked. Science is the result of the desire for knowledge. The beauty of science arises from the fact that there exists a close connection between truth and beauty. This connection is probably due to the very structure of our minds. But the primary aim of the scientific man is not beauty, but knowledge. In this, he differs from the artist, whose primary concern is beauty. But in his search for beauty, the artist can also reveal to us truth and knowledge. Thus, science and art are akin." Now, I think that, again, gets at the fact that when you're discussing human culture, human art, you're not discussing something which is mere entertainment, which is a mere dazzling of the senses. And just for maybe humor's sake, I wanted to just read a couple of things, because throughout human history, the issue of human art and human culture has not just been some ambivalent process that rolls along and, you know, at one point Beethoven was popular, but now the people like Justin Bieber's. You know, it's not just some naturally evolving thing, but the culture, human culture, has always been a battleground. And you've had certain figures in culture which were promoted by fascist systems. And the reason they promoted the culture is to control the human mind. And just two examples, but it's really the same thing I wanted to give, who were contemporaries of Mendelssohn, were Hector Berlioz and Franz Liszt. And both of these ridiculous characters were protégés, funded, promoted, given, concerts by the fascist system of Metternich, which was, under Metternich, you had the reimposition of fascism in Europe after the failure of what was the promise of the French Revolution. So Metternich, in the imposition of a fascist police state, promotes Berlioz and Liszt. And here's something I wanted to read from Berlioz. So this is Berlioz describing the process of musical composition. So Berlioz says, "It's all there. The nervous shaking, spasms, chattering teeth, shivers, cold sweats, convulsions, and the loss of consciousness. When the attack is over, the composer comes to his table exhausted, panting, remembering nothing of what has just happened. But he realizes with pleasure that his music paper is covered with feverish notes, and that he has just added several important pages to his score." And Clara Schumann, who is a great friend of Mendelssohn, describes Berlioz thus: "It is hard to know whether we should call him a genius or a musical adventurer. He dazzles like a flash of lightning, but leaves behind the smell of sulfur." And then, similarly, a description of Franz Liszt. Demonic, Mephistophelian, satanic. Such words have often been used to describe Liszt's new style of keyboard diablerie. The emotional impact of his playing on the Parisians has been well documented. Storm and stress has entered the concert hall. The scene was sometimes like a séance, in which some unknown spirit stirred and swept the audience with fear and ecstasy. Now, Robert Schumann, the husband of Clara Schumann's comment on Liszt, and just to say briefly, Schumann was a great proponent of the American Revolution and of the idea of republicanism and of the idea of Friedrich Schiller that political freedom and artistic progress are one and the same thing. Robert Schumann, describing Liszt, says, "How extraordinarily he plays, boldly and wildly, and then again, dreamily and ethereally. All of these things were in his playing. But, Clara, this world, his world, it's no longer mine. Art, as you practice it and as I do when I compose at the piano, this rare intimacy I would not give for all his splendor. And indeed, there is too much tinsel about it. But I will say no more. I think you know what I mean." So this fight for the human mind, which is embodied in culture, this is our fight today. And I wanted to throw this in because I think people need to realize that in our fight for this policy change on economics, in the fight for a future for civilization, it is also a fight for a beautiful culture. It's one and the same thing. There is no separation between them. And I want to throw this in because this really has to become the identity of people who are fighting politically today.
So therefore, this subject is crucial. So what's going on here? First of all, we should look at the situation as comparing man with the expected future life of the sun. The sun is expected within probably 2 million years is to disappear. But along the line, there will be other changes in the solar system, which make it very questionable as how that mankind could continue to live in the sun, in the solar system, in the way that people refer to the solar system today. What we're saying is that mankind is not what we define by ordinary speech. Mankind is an element of the universe, which has a special role in the universe. Mankind's role in the universe is not learning how to behave. Mankind is changing the definition of behavior by living and by developing. So these are the crude, simple features of this process. And what you've touched on opens up into a very large area of changing what words mean. For example, you have the case of mankind as compared to other species. Mankind has a creativity. No other animal species has creativity. Mankind as a species evolve. They develop. They develop with the accumulation of experience. But they don't actually create development. Mankind creates development. And these are the kinds of things we have to consider. But the question here is, what's the purpose of man's existence? Well, for one, if the sun is going to blow up within 2 million years, or billion years, then we've got to do something about that. The idea of growth and development cannot be limited to arbitrary terms. It means there's a goal involved. Just as man supersedes the animal, by the virtue of creativity, so mankind must supersede himself. And eventually, we represent and must see ourselves as representing a principle or a growth of a principle, which in the first level we can think of it's the solar system as a limitation, 2 billion years. That's our span. How long is the actual span? And the next thing is, what are we going to do in this universe? What are we as man that is different than the animals or an animal-like creature? What is our mission? And I think what we have to do, I've been thinking as we were talking along on this thing, and I just said, well, I know what I want to say, and I could say it, but I think this thing requires a lot more time for expansion on these few points that I've mentioned here. Mm-hmm. That this is the question. What you posed, what you presented, is the question. The terms you use may not be adequate, but I think we know what we mean when we say that is the question. That is the meaning of mankind, or the discovered meaning of mankind, which we must come to recognize in defining our mission, defining our role. It's not the simple subjective kind of thing of the artist ordinarily and so forth. You have touched into my area, my special area of concern, and this one, I think, is the big one. It then probably is something much bigger beyond what I'm talking about now. But for me, right now, things that bother me, the things that problems I have to solve on terms of this kind of subject matter, are that they're defined. And I think it's probably the most important subject matter which anyone could present at this time in human history. I say that mankind is a creature. Take the species. You have the animals generally. You have mankind's behavior as it has been understood generally, which is almost like the animal. But mankind, when at its higher form, which the antecedents of your presentations today gave, this takes us into a completely different conception of mankind. We no longer think of language. We no longer think of ordinary experience. We no longer think about personal goals as such. We think about a personal life becomes located entirely not in the experience we go through, or whether it's desirable, undesirable, whether it's pleasant to other people or not pleasant to them. These things are minor. The question is, what is the essence of man in the universe? Here we are a creature of creation. And we are now, especially as we go into the solar system and the problems we're dealing with in terms of the solar system now, we have a higher destiny. We have a higher meaning to our lives, to the fact of human life, than any other species. There's nothing like it. And I think mankind will not be really civilized in a way that mankind can be satisfied with the term civilization, except by understanding this problem and dealing with it.
Right, and it does take the form of a mission, because as you referenced before, any particular state of mankind or any particular understanding that man has of his role in the universe will always be superseded. And we know that. And so I think what you're pointing out is crucial, is that it is the idea of taking up a mission for this quality, to express this quality of this characteristic of mankind, which you know you'll always come to a higher understanding of.
I made some notes as you were presenting things, and I shall come back to this subject on the basis of those notations and try to give this in a more clearly understandable form. It's a very important subject, and using your starting point was very good. It's quite relevant. We have a man who has an idea, a conception of the universe, and it's a valid conception. It's not the final conception. It's not the true conception, but by what it does accomplish, by his work, what it does accomplish, it provokes us to look further. And I think mankind has come to a time of crisis when we must urgently look further, because there are too many idiots or dumb people out there who have no conception of what we're getting up to right now in this threat of a thermonuclear conflagration throughout the planet. That condition compels us to think in fresh ways and to understand the meaning of humanity from a higher standpoint than mankind has generally ever considered it before.
In the near term. So
okay.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Leona. And we'll see everybody next week.